Hi-ho, Dr. Jimmy here, and today, and what day is it? Oh, June 8th, yes, June 8th, 2016, a Wednesday. Today I begin my 9th video, I believe. I think that's right, yes. My 9th video for my series on the history of Halloween Horror Nights 22, the event that was held at Universal Studios Florida in the year 2012. 4 years ago, roughly. However, of course, as has become the annual tradition for all of these, is, of course, the T-shirt of the day. And today's shirt is a shirt from Halloween Horror Nights 25 last year. Yes, it's the Horror Alumni T-shirt. Yes, showing all the lovely icons except for the usher, as these images were taken from other T-shirts. And they put them on this, and they had Bloody Mary originally, but then they found out they couldn't use her, and they took her off and put instead Chucky, who isn't an icon. Isn't that funny? So we have Jack, the director, the caretaker, and the storyteller, and Chucky on this shirt as Horror Alumni. Also, this was a special edition of the shirt. Now, they sold this to regular guests, but they had a special edition only for Universal Orlando annual pass holders, yes. And this one was sold only to pass holders, and they had a special sale on Wednesday, the 16th of September last year, 2 days before the event began, but before the what do they call it, the team member preview. I don't go to that. I've never been to that, but I did go on Wednesday to use my annual pass to get into the sale and buy a bunch of merchandise so I wouldn't have to cart it around with me on opening night, which is always an inconvenience. So that's the story of this shirt. Now let's get on with Horror Nights 22. And I had left off beginning my talk last time about the 6th haunted house of that event, Alice Cooper, Welcome to My Nightmare. Now, Alice Cooper didn't start out as Alice Cooper. That's not the name on his birth certificate. No, his name is Vincent Fournier, of French ancestry, and is, oddly enough, was raised as a Mormon, and not the mainstream LDS church, but the what's sometimes called the original LDS church, whatever it is, a split-off group that's a lot more like a regular Protestant church in a lot of ways, less having their theology is a little bit different from the mainstream LDS church. And so that particular group, so he had a rather conservative Christian upbringing, and he is, in fact, rather conservative in political views. I believe he votes Republican. So it's kind of a surprise to people who expect someone like Alice Cooper, oh, he should be rather liberal. But, you know, an awful lot of these sort of rock musicians tend to be rather conservative. Dee Snider, for example, is supporting Donald Trump. And then, of course, very famously, another one, what's his name, Ted Nugent, is also supporting Trump and is extremely right-wing in his views, almost a freaking Nazi. And then, of course, there's Marilyn Manson supported George W. Bush in those elections back in the day. So you see, quite a different, not what you'd expect from a lot of these people. So a bit of a surprise. Although I think Rob Zombie tends to be politically on the left, thank God. I'm not sure. I've not really looked at his politics. Anyway, Alice Cooper started out his band. The band was called Alice Cooper. Yes, that was the name of the band. And originally Vincent Fournier was the lead singer of a band called Alice Cooper, and it was a glam band back in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, when glam rock was the rage. When David Bowie was just starting, and there were a lot of other people of this glam. There was Iggy Pop, there was, oh, I forget his name, the guy who died young. There was a couple other people at that time. The whole glam movement, Gary Glitter. We didn't know he was a pervert at the time. Shouldn't use the word pervert, I suppose. Paraphilic, well, he was a pedophile. What is? There's nothing else to get around that. That's what he is. That's a pervert. I suppose that you can still use the word pervert for them. We didn't know that then. Doesn't mean his music isn't good. It just means that he's a bad man who makes good music. There are a lot of bad men who make good music. So, You know, it doesn't mean that albums should never be listened to or enjoyed. It just means you have to remember the guy who did this was a disgusting person. Anyway, Alice Cooper, however, began to segue from glam rock into sort of shock rock, inspired by earlier shock rock musicians, some of the seminal people like Screaming Lord Sutch in Britain, who actually formed his own silly party, the Monster Raving Loony Party. Yes, except of course that's meant to be a joke. I recently saw the Libertarian Convention. I'd actually considered Gary Johnson seriously for a moment. Then I saw the convention and realized, oh my God, they're just like the Monster Raving Loony Party, except they're serious. Oh my Lord. And that made me just laugh. And so, no, I'll be voting for Hillary most likely. The way it's turning out. But politics aside, put the politics aside, and let's get back to Vincent Fournier, or I should say, when he became a shock rocker, that's when he started calling himself Alice Cooper rather than the name of the band. It became his stage name. That's how it all started. So the girl name originally was part of the whole glam androgyny thing, but then just became something ironic because he never dressed in drag after that. He only had like the creepy eye makeup and usually wore some sort of top hat and tails, perhaps in imitation of Screaming Lord Sutch, who often wore that sort of costume himself when he performed Jack the Ripper and many of those great hits in the 60s. So that's who that is, just in case you didn't know, because as I said, there were some lads in the queue for the house who had no idea who Alice Cooper was and asked me, who is she? Oh dear. So the house itself featured the storyline of the concept album, Welcome to My Nightmare, the creepy little story of Stephen who goes quite mad. And I'm trying to remember all of it, but you start out in the going to the house, of course. The facade was Alice Cooper's head. Big, not three-dimensional, but a sort of cut-out image, gigantic on the balsa wood or whatever they use for the facade of his head. And you went into the house through his mouth. Yes, you go into Alice Cooper's mouth, just like you know, that's a bit naughty if you think about it another way, but you go in there and you find yourself in an insane asylum. First, scenes of padded cells and lunatics, sometimes with the same eye makeup. Then that quickly segues into the story. It's like maybe Stephen's in this asylum and now you're going back into his twisted flashbacks, and his imagination and his memory are quite distorted. And so you go back to the family home and you can see little Stephen, if you look carefully down in the corner, peeking under a cupboard, a little boy going, quite horrified. And Mum and Dad are there, but Mum and Dad are horrible, twisted versions of Mum and Dad, and the awful things they did to the little boy, the domestic abuse that he suffered, that caused his mind to start melting. And out the kitchen window, you can see Alice Cooper himself, this top hat. Of course, it's a mannequin. And Mother's there, she's quite creepy. And Dad comes out wearing one of those vests, one of those sleeveless T-shirts, like a big Guido, kind of fat, kind of nasty, you know, bully type, to attack you. So it's a horrible childhood. Then it goes into hospital because they take the boy and put him away. And there's doctors, nurses doing horrible things to a patient who's also Alice Cooper, you know, with electricity and nasty injections and things. It's all quite horrible. Then school, because school was a terrible experience for young Stephen. Here I think it was first the Black Widow scene, because there's a track, Black Widow. And so you go into a room with all sorts of webs and spiders, and then there's this woman who's sort of the Black Widow there in the web, quite creepy but beautiful. And then at the end, another one as you leave the room, and this time her face is the face of a spider. Ew, quite horrific mandibles, you know, yeah, quite creepy. So after that horrible thing, you go into the high school, I believe was next. And the high school, of course, they had the opportunity to use a piece of music not on this particular album, but one of the most iconic and famous Alice Cooper numbers of all time, School's Out. You know, it even had it written on the wall, "School's out," and graffiti. So, you know, "School's out for summer." It's the song that, when I was a kid at least, you always sang on the last day of school, because you know, when you're a kid in high school, you think, "Oh God, now summer vacation, I'm freedom." And you know, it's only a couple of months and then you're back in school again in September. But at the time when you're young, it seems like an eternity of freedom to go out and get to the beach and party and all the fun things you get to do in the summertime without being enslaved to your desk and your homework and all that shit, right? So that's the way it's the exuberance of youth, getting of liberation from school. Yay! Except you always end up going back to school again. And some of us, we never escape. Look at me. I graduated from high school. I graduated from the university. I graduated from graduate school, got my doctoral degree. And what happens? I'm teaching school. I'm back in the classroom, but now I'm the professor. I'm not the student, so I guess that makes a difference. I don't know. But that's what happens. So some of us never get out of school. Oh, dear. So after the school scenes, of course, it was funny. Vincent Fournier High School, yeah, it used the real name as the name of the school. And you find yourself under the bleachers, and there are bullies there. A great big hulking jock and a mean girl cheerleader, both with weird sort of white masks like porcelain dolls. Kind of creepy, and they're going to brutalize you and embarrass and humiliate you like a little nerdy, wimpy wuss you are, because they're the cool kids and you're not cool. And you get to experience the way Stephen was humiliated and brutalized in high school. Of course, what goes on under the bleachers, when a bully takes you under the bleachers, he might be there to pound you, but he might be there for some other naughty reason. I don't know, maybe he wants you to do his homework for him, I don't know. Or something else, eh? And for some people it may not be all that brutalizing, but that's another story. Anyway, not talking about in my own experiences, mind you, but you never know. Anyway, get out of there and you find yourself in a strange scene. I think it was like a mortuary, a morgue. There was all these mortuary shelves and things, but there was a stripper in there. A stripper on a stripper pole. I think her face was coming off or something. She wasn't quite alive, but it was kind of creepy. Like, what's she going to take off? Just her clothes or her skin too? And I wouldn't be surprised if some silly guest tried to slip dollar bills into her stockings or something, like she was actually going to strip for them. What do you expect? And there was also a nice fellow up in the ceiling who reached down at you as you left that scene. Always fun to have someone in the ceiling to scare you like that. And after that, I think it was a sort of surreal. It got surreal after this. You went sort of like a chapel with stained glass of the big eyes of Alice Cooper, you know, with the trademark makeup. That image was all through the whole house. Over and over, you saw the eyes of Alice Cooper staring at you. And number 13 and other things, and it had to do with his various works. And there you saw an alcove. Some of the people that had brutalized Stephen, now dead, hung up there like crucified or killed or something, sacrificed his mother, the bully, you know, other people up in the doctor, nurse, whatever. Or some of them, of course, weren't quite. Then he came to life after you as you walked through the alcove. You just didn't know which ones were mannequins and which ones are characters. Always a nifty trick. And then the climax, you go back into the asylum. Now you're back into padded cells and insanity. And then finally into a room that was almost like a sort of carnival-esque room. There was the ringmaster type, you know, Alice Cooper with his top hat and tails taunting you. And on the one side was another Alice being beheaded by a guillotine and one big hung by the neck, I think. It was sort of like, you know, the sort of things that he did on his stage show. So you go through that last bit and then you're out of the house. And of course, you scan your card. So that was Alice Cooper, Welcome to My Nightmare. I also couldn't help but notice, because I noticed silly things, sometimes I look at the floor in some of these scenes, and the floor, that the paint they put on the floor, some places they didn't do as good a job, because you could see some of the black light, strange satanic diagrams from the in-between the year before were still there, just barely covered by paint. Oh, look, I remember that from last year, yeah. So, let's see. Made a cocktail that year, of course, for the house. Alice Cooper, Welcome to My Nightmare. Yes, indeed. Cocktail. Let's bring it up on my phone so you can see what it looked like. Let's see, where's my photos and my albums, and go to HHN 22 House Cocktails, and sure enough, here's the Alice Cooper beverage. Yes, for Alice Cooper, Welcome My Nightmare, there is an actual virgin cocktail called the Alice, consisting of grenadine, orange and pineapple juices, and cream. Ugh. To turn Alice into Alice Cooper, we threw in a nightmarish shot of Jägermeister. Ugh. So you ended up with what looked like and what tasted like a milkshake from hell. So it's sort of appropriate for young Stephen's terrible life. And that was the Alice Cooper beverage in a tall glass, all quite nasty. As you can see here, it was one of the baddest, worst tasting cocktails that I've made, and I don't think I would recommend it to anyone, but that was the Alice Cooper beverage. You know, it came out tasting rather like the worst milkshake you could ever drink. Ugh. So that was that one. So now we have one house left. That was the last house of the event, as they only had 7 houses, and it was, of course, in Sprung Tent number 2, the one that you enter by Men in Black, right out behind that place. So Sprung Tent 2's house was Penn Teller, Newk'd, Las Vegas. And again, the irony, because I had predicted Penn Teller for Alice Cooper, thinking it would never happen, and then it did. So what I thought was ridiculous turned out to be real. Oh my lord. So Penn Teller did, in fact, the famous pair of magicians, sort of avant-garde or even postmodern magicians who deconstruct magic, sometimes doing tricks with trap doors and things, so you can, all in glass, so you can actually see how the trick works, and turning magic on its head in a way. And of course notorious for their extreme left politics, and notorious for their wonderful show Bullshit, in which they take all sorts of sacred cows and expose them for what they really are on the television. Quite amusing and often very thoughtful in a weird way. And Penn Teller actually had a history at Horror Nights before this, as they performed at the second ever Halloween Horror Nights in Hollywood, what was called Halloween Horror Nights at Universal Studios Hollywood in the 1992, which began, I think it was over 6 non-consecutive nights, beginning on the evening of Thursday, October 22nd, 1992, which is kind of weird, because normally Halloween Horror Nights always starts on a Friday, and this one started on a Thursday, a day earlier than Halloween Horror Nights 2, which only ran for 5 non-consecutive nights, beginning on that Friday, October 23rd, 1990. I was in Orlando, so the Hollywood event started a day earlier that year. It was kind of interesting. I didn't go to that, of course. I have not been able to go to any of the events in Hollywood. But that one had a Penn Teller show. They actually did a show at the event, and that's the only time in the past they had been involved in Horror Nights, but only in Hollywood. So now they came to Orlando and helped design the haunted house themselves. They with their ideas, and they did put interactive things in the house that guests could play with, and they did make personal appearances at the house. I think they were actually meant to appear in the house during their personal appearances, but apparently that couldn't be done, and so they made appearances outside the house with news cameras there, and on certain nights you could meet them in the queue going in, and you could stop and talk to them, get your photo taken with them, maybe an autograph, that sort of thing, and sort of a meet and greet thing. That was quite neat, but I missed all of those meet and greets, unfortunately. I didn't get to meet Penn Teller myself, but I did enjoy the rather interesting house, which the whole idea was that they were doing a trick in Vegas. They have a show in Vegas, of course. They were doing a trick where they would catch, the old catch a bullet in your teeth. It's something Houdini used to do, right? Of course, he didn't do that. Actually, they thought they were shooting a live round, but they weren't. And he actually had the bullet in his mouth already. It's very clever. But in this case, they were going to catch a nuclear weapon. They found an actual missile, a nuclear warhead, a live nuclear missile, and they were going to fire off the nuclear weapon into Las Vegas, and then one of them, Penn or Teller, I don't know which, would catch it in his teeth, see, and it wouldn't go off. Except, they fucked up. And it went off and nuked the entire city. Somehow Penn Teller survived, though, because they showed up to make public appearances. Nevertheless, Vegas got completely nuked, but instead of being incinerated, it just got radioactive. Maybe it was one of those dirty bombs or a neutron bomb, I don't know, but it irradiated the city, and so everything got radioactive and everything got mutated. So it's a mutant Vegas is what it was. Oh, in bright neon colors because it was in 3D. One of those mazes. Yes. So you wear the little funny glasses. And so you come up along and you find the facade. There's lots of the very famous classic sign, "Welcome to Vegas," the sort of diamond-shaped sign, but it's broken and falling over, and someone's written in "Newk'd Vegas" over it. And there's big vats of toxic chemicals spilling out nasty glowing green shit all over the place. And the Puking Man, the famous animatronic Puking Man, which I think first appeared many years before the Demon Cantina. It's an animatronic that goes, and vomit comes out of its mouth into a tub. So you got to see the Puking Man. And then when you go into the house, you find yourself in a sort of containment room, you know, with all sorts of chemical suits that you might want to put on before you go into this, you know, big door made out of metal, a big vault door, so that you would get into the radioactive areas, except that of course you don't actually put on the protective clothing. And there was something very strange. There were clown suits and great big clown shoes. What were those doing with these other things in those lockers? And in fact, Penn's voice, you hear Penn's voice sometimes throughout the house saying, "Why are there clown shoes here?" And the answer would come later in the house. But I've exceeded my time, and so I'll have to wait till part 10.